Well, we're back again with Joe, and what Joe's going to do now, he's going to do a kind of a recap, looking back at what we've just gone through and to put it in perspective, and also to show you that he's not alone in what he's saying, because there are others that are coming up that they may not come to the exact same conclusion Joe comes to, but Joe's sitting over here, and I want to say hello to Joe. You're there, aren't you?
Hi, Jay. Hi, I'm here.
I see your face there. Listen, before we go on, some people, Muslims, have come up and said they don't like that face because that is the face of the Dajjal. Can you explain your face so people know what you're coming from and why you put that specific face up there?
Okay, this is a symbol of the head of Edom in Judaism. We have a story about Edom representing, Edom represents Christianity, Ishmael represents Islam, and Jacob represents Judaism. So we have a story about how all of us are going to end up together in the world to come one day. And the story of how, historically Jacob and Edom had difficulty. So the story of how Edom gets in, the first part of him to get in is his head and one eye. So this symbol is meaning that the Christians will have a place in the world to come according to Judaism. It's just kind of like the positive way of looking at it, because a lot of people often think that Jews and Christians are never going to get along, and so this is a symbol to remind at least my side, the Jewish side, that remember the head of Edom. They do get a place in the world to come. So that's why I'm working with Christians. So that's what that stands for. But yes, I do have some people saying that this is.
You do also have a response, don't you, for Muslims to say that is the Dajjal? What's your response to them?
Well, if they are saying that I'm the Dajjal for this Abbasid narrative, this Abbasid religion.
Explain the Dajjal. Maybe not everybody knows what that means.
Sorry, the Dajjal is the Antichrist in according to the Abbasid narrative. The Antichrist is the Dajjal, and he has either poor eyesight or he has one eye missing. And my response to those people who say, "Well, look, you look like the Dajjal to us. You're attacking Islam." My response is, I'm not attacking the origins of this text. I'm attacking the religion that it became. That's the Abbasid religion. And sure, if you think that I'm the Dajjal for the Abbasid religion, then I'd be I'd be honored. I'd be honored to be the Dajjal against the Abbasid religion.
Okay.
So
you wear that mantle with pride, is what you're saying.
Yes, I mean I'm against human trafficking. I'm against wife beating. I'm against child marriages. I'm 100% against this religion. Absolutely. So if you think I'm the Dajjal against that religion, go ahead. I'm not going to be offended by that. That's not a problem for me.
Joe,
but I hope that.
Okay, now let's get back. Let's go.
Right.
I'm going to give it over to you now. Unpack it with what you're saying, because what you want to do is you want to understand the 7th century text, don't you?
Well, that's right. So I think we need to look at a little bit of context. Some of this we've seen before, so I won't dwell long on it. So understanding the 7th century texts used for the Islamic Qur'an. I'm looking at religiously relevant developments in the 7th century Northern Arabia, from which the texts emerged, which would be used for the Islamic Quran. They were texts which emerged. You've heard Odon talking about it. You've heard Thomas talking about it. They were texts which emerged eventually, and they were eventually forged into this Abbasid Quran 100 years, 150 years, even going on for hundreds of years later. So just looking at the background to that. Now, first of all, so let's carry on. So there is no evidence of any 7th century empire from the Hijaz. That's the first thing that everybody starts to notice. We've got lots of scholars starting to sort of get on board with this idea that, as you say all the time, there's no water in the mid-Hijaz where Mecca is supposed to be. How did it originate when there's a place there's no water there? And so when we got that problem, we immediately have to throw out the Abbasid narrative, really, because if the whole Abbasid narrative is saying it's all began down there, and it's like a witness in the stand when you go to court. If your witness has been proven to be a liar on one thing, you have to throw the witness out. You can't keep that witness anymore. So then we have to throw out everything that the Abbasid narrative is saying. But that leaves us all a bit like fumbling in the dark to try and work out what really happened. And so everybody is describing, like this little picture here of the people blindfolded in the dark, describing an elephant. And I think that all of us are correct. We're all describing things accurately, but we just haven't got the big picture yet. And that's why somebody's saying it's a spear, somebody's saying it's a fan, somebody's saying it's a wall, somebody's saying it's a rope, a snake, a tree. And in fact, they're all describing what they can feel very, very well. But in the end, if they took the blindfolds off and saw the big picture, it'd be an elephant. And so I think, you know, the explanations that we're getting so far from people, all different people describing what we've got, they're all right. As Odon always says, you know, it's just how do we fit it all together? There is a big picture. How do we fit it all together? This is the picture I see so far. So that's what I'm going on here. Now, this is Fred Donner from Chicago University. Now, he acknowledged the possibility of Jerusalem or South Iraq at the American Academy in Berlin. When in this little video here, I'm going to have to just press play and skip through it a bit. I've slowed down what he says because it's very quick, and somebody else, the questioner from the audience, speaks over him, and you can't hear exactly what he says if it may be the first time. So I'm going to play it 3 times, and you'll hear as it slows down. You can hear he says, the man says in Jerusalem, and he nods to Jerusalem, and then he says, responds to the questioner, he responds, or South Arabia, South Iraq. And that's the important thing here. So I'm just going to press play on that.
So where would you draw, please, the line between the historic Muhammad and the mythic Muhammad, as difficult as it may be? Evidently, there's a mythological aspect, Muhammad traveling through the skies and into the sky, and there's a historic aspect clearly, but some people go as far as to say the religion of Islam, you mentioned it, didn't arise in the area of Mecca and Medina, rather in the area of Jerusalem. Right. So where would you draw the line? South Arabia. South Arabia. And again, how would you portray the political interests that led to the way the figure of Muhammad was construed over the decades, if not to say over the centuries?
You know, there are people who argue that Muhammad never existed, like there used to be people who argued that Jesus never existed, because, you know, we don't have actual documentary evidence for it. We only have the evidence from within the religious tradition. But the people who argue that, I think, are rather willful in overlooking a couple of pieces of evidence, well, not documentary exactly, but there is, for example, a scrap of Syriac text that dates from something like 634, which is only a couple of years after the Prophet died, that talks about, in Syriac, the Tayyaye de Mehmet. It talks about the nomads of someone named, looks like Muhammad, right? So this is like almost immediately after he dies, there is a non-Muslim, shall we say, not from the believers community, a reference to an event involving a raid by these people, and they're associated with the name of a person named Mehmet. So I think we have to accept that, yeah, the Prophet was there. Now, how much more of the shall we say, mythic construction of Muhammad's life that we find in the traditional narratives, which as I summarized for you here earlier, we want to accept, is a really tough question, and there's no answer that we can, no obvious answer we can give to it. My own sense, though, is that when, let's put it this way, when the day of judgment comes and all truths are revealed, including historic truths, if we get to that point, we will find, I think, that the traditional Muslim narrative is not completely off base, that maybe 80 or 90% of it is pretty much sort of what happened, but that there are certain points at which it has given a totally different spin to aspects of that development. And I think, for example, the notion of communal identity is one of those areas where the real picture might have been quite different from what we're given in the sort of traditional narration, the mythic.
So there we have Fred Donner of Chicago University acknowledging the possibility of it all happening in Jerusalem or South Iraq, and also, of course, his only criticism for people who he says that arguing that Muhammad didn't exist is that he thinks that we are not looking at evidence like this Tayyad Mahmet situation, which I've already explained, of course, with Jay on the channel. And I don't know if Jay's agreed with me yet, but I was presenting the possibility this is actually somebody more like Omar, not actually Muhammad. We're talking about somebody that would be the figure of Omar. But anyway, that's our...
Joe, let me
Yeah.
say something real quick. I think
Yeah.
what is fascinating is that notice what he did say. He still says 80 to 90%. We can say
Yes.
historical. To me, that is incredulous. And I'm wondering
It
how
is.
he can say that when he has already stipulated that none of this happens in Mecca or Medina. If none of this happens in
Right,
Mecca and
that's the key
Medina,
point.
then
That's what I was saying,
and
yes.
where does it happen? If it doesn't happen there, then how can you trust any of it? Because how can you
That's the point.
continue to give lip service to 80 to 90% unless it's because he has to be careful what he says in public
Yes.
because of the chair
Well, obviously.
and the institution he represents.
And fair enough, you know, they've got to be protecting that. But you can see if he's saying that it's happened in, it's possible, it could have happened in Jerusalem or it could have happened in South Iraq. And, you know, when he says about the Tayyaya de Mahmet, it was happening there at that time, but that's in the late 630s, and that's in Jordan. You know, so it's not in central Hijaz, and it's not in the 610s and the 620s. So anyway, they're opening their minds, but he's not the only one. Yeah,
Joe,
yeah.
Where are the Tayyaya? Where would you place the Tayyaya?
Well, Tayyaya is just the Syriac way of saying what Sebios calls Tajikistan,
Okay.
which is
and where's
basically
Tajikistan?
That's North Mesopotamia or Iraq, essentially. That's
Bingo.
Iraq.
So that's not Jordan.
Yeah.
That's Iraq.
That's right. But they invaded through Jordan, where Jordan is. So
the
location of the.
I'm just going to put a map up here to show you
Yes.
where the Tayyaya is, where we're talking about.
Yes.
This is hundreds of miles away. It's much further north and it's much further east.
Yes.
So people realize that they won't come back and say, well, actually, he is still agreeing. No, this has nothing to do with the Hijaz. Okay, back to you again.
Thank you. So I'm just saying that there are academics who's starting to come to this. Let me show you another one who's also agreeing, and then maybe you've got something to share as well. But let me show you another one here. So we also have Peter von Sivers of Utah University. He says that the origin was with people who lived somewhere in the Syrian desert, wherever they were. Syrian desert, mind you.
I mentioned a little earlier, we now know that the Quran is truly, dates truly to the 600s. In which way it came about, that is still very mysterious. From what I am saying here, we have to assume that it came together as a scripture between 602 and sometimes toward the end of the 600s. And when I say 602, that's of course the time when the Eastern Christian Arabs dispersed in the Syrian desert. Note, by the way, that I'm not saying anything about Mecca and Medina. I'm merely talking about the Eastern and Western Arab Christians in the Syrian desert, wherever they were.
So there you have Peter von Sivers also distancing himself from the concept that it all happened in Mecca and Medina, saying, note, by the way, I'm not saying any of this happened in Mecca and Medina, just somewhere in this desert, wherever they were. And he doesn't even limit the time for the writing of these materials, which became the Quran. He doesn't say somewhere between 602 and say 632, which is what we would expect. He says, and the end of the 7th century. So he's really opened up. He's really distancing himself from sounding too much like he's on the supporting the standard Islamic narrative. Perhaps he's more distancing himself more than Fred Donner is there. But he's not alone. You know, there's a movement of academics starting to distance themselves from the standard Islamic narrative. Peter von Sivers is also one of the ones who, like me, says that there's not a single verse in the Quran, which in the original texts, in the Umayyad text, there's nothing which attacks the Trinity there. It's all attacking tritheism, which is what I say, what he says. But it's not what you've heard here. You know, I was going to say, actually, you know, that we all agree that, you know, a lot of what I could say has already been said by O'Donnell and Thomas, with one important exception, which changes everything. And yes, we all agree that the 7th century religion was more Christian than Islamic, and that Islam really only began to evolve in the 8th century. So then just you see that Peter von Sivers is there, also distancing himself from the standard Islamic narrative. Somewhere in the Syrian desert, wherever it was, the authorship of the Quran wasn't necessary. He doesn't say it was finished early in the 7th century, but leaves it open until the end of the 7th century. And and he agrees with me on a few other things as well. So, all right, then let's go on. Jay, you've also come across some other academics who are also distancing themselves from this. Is that right?
I'm going to be, this is, I mean, what you're bringing up here, and this is why many people are saying, hold on a minute, you sin sifters, you guys that are taking everything and you're putting it through the sieve, you're putting it through the sift, and you're coming out with these conclusions. Who else agrees with you on this? Well, here are two scholars. You don't get any, you probably cannot get somebody more authoritative than Fred Donner and Peter von Sivers, who are very much agreeing. And the reason they're agreeing is they have no other way to really go right or left, because so far nothing has been found in the Hijaz. Nothing has been found in that central part of Arabia, which is much further south. And both of them are both agreeing, this is very clear on both those clips you gave, that it is up in Jerusalem, or as Donna says, over in southern Iraq. So did von Sivers. He's talking about the Tajikistan. He's talking about the fact that this is not the Hijaz. And notice, he's saying it's in Syria. Well, that's up in the north again, but he's giving the dates between 602 to 699. The Qur'an itself being put together, which is exactly what we've been trying to tell everybody. If you're putting it together and you're borrowing it from many different sources, primarily from Syriac sources and Hebrew sources, where do you think all these Hebrew and Syriac sources are? They're not down in the Hijaz, because there are no Christians and Jews that far south. They are where the Christians and Jews are. In the same token, you need to know where the water is. You also need to know where the Christians and Jews are in order to have this text and in order to see Islam starting to form. And of course, it did not form in the Islam that we have today. The Islam we have today is an Abbasid Islam. You said that many times, Joe, and thank you for getting us onto that. And it's so good that you are able to really now bring some support from outside. Now, we're all going to be, there are others that are supporting us. Dr. Robert Kerr, I'll be doing some videos with him. He now has agreed to come on board. He is the head of Inara. He agrees with this completely. In fact, he just wrote me, emailed me and said, thank you for all these videos you're doing, because they agree. That is pretty much, you're taking from what we are doing in German and putting it into English so the world can see it. Dr. Robert Hoyland also is great. For those of you who have been watching his the different interviews that he's been doing, look at those interviews and look and see what he's saying. He's saying the same thing that Fred Donner is saying. He's saying the same thing that Peter von Sivers is saying. And listen, he's been Hoyland has been saying this since the last century. I mean, he wrote his in 1997 is when he first wrote about the idea that there are no Jews, there are no Christians that far south, not in the Hijaz, not in the central part of Arabia. All of this has to happen up in what is today Syria and in what is today Jordan, and also what is today Iraq. So this has been good. Thanks so much, Joe. It's great to have you on board. It's great to bring people that actually agree with what you have been saying for years and what you're trying to get across now. It's great to see that you aren't standing alone. You aren't out in left field like many people would like to suggest. You really are saying what now the academics are finally coming around to say in public. These are public clips, and we need to have more of these just to prove to the people that much of academia is coming to the conclusion that Islam did not happen in Mecca and Medina, not in the Hijaz, and the Quran was not written that far south. It was written where the people were, and where the people are is where the water is, and where the civilizations are, where the towns are, and where the seminaries are, and where these ideas are percolating. You have to be in that type of environment to get the Quran that we have today. Joe, it's been great to have you. Thanks for coming on board. What are you going to do next?
Thank you. We're just going to carry on looking through the background to where these texts came from, how they arrived, and looking more at the Judaic side of things.
Okay, terrific. Great. You heard him. Come on back. Let's now see what, this is one of the reasons we bring Joe on board, because he has a whole different idea, a whole different background. He has a whole different expertise in gifting that many of the others on our Sin Sifter team don't have. And it's great. Thanks, Joe, for doing that. Can't wait to see what you have to say. This is Jay and Joe, 3,000 miles apart. Over and out.